Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be discussing how augmented analytics can help banks and fintechs modernize their financial crime operations and achieve compliance and operational efficiencies in the rapidly changing European regulatory landscape. My name is Hugh Morris, and it's my pleasure to be able to chair this event today. I can only do so thanks to the generosity of our sponsors, a key one of which being Featurespace, who are leading today. And our sponsors allow us to produce these webinars on topics that range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. Now, my job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible and to hand over to our panel. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. We'll be holding a 30-minute discussion with the panel today, after which we will have a Q&A session for the remainder of the session. Please make sure to use the GoToWebinar chat facilities to send your questions into me throughout the discussion. I can then feed them into the conversation on your behalf. Joining me today are a panel of experts from across the industry. First, Annegret Funke joined Featurespace in 2019 as Senior Solutions Consultant and has since transitioned to Head of Financial Crime, advising institutions and bringing advanced analytics into their AML transaction monitoring programs. Annegret has 7 years' experience working in the RegTech space, working closely with Tier 1 financial institutions successfully to deploy innovative AML and EDD solutions in both commercial and product management roles. She holds an MSc in Security Studies from UCL and is a certified anti-money laundering specialist. With her is Mark Gregory, a director in PwC's forensic practice, specializing in the design and implementation of technology and analytic solutions to detect and prevent fraud and financial crime. Mark has over 12 years' experience working in both public and private sectors and supports clients in areas such as strategy, design, review, implementation, and optimization of controls. Annegret and Mark, welcome, and thank you very much for giving us your time this morning. So our conversationalists represent a broad spectrum of expertise in designing and implementing AML systems, and will be sharing insights on best how to identify the right strategy and technology path for your organization. So without further ado, let's move on to today's discussion. I have 5 main points I would wish to cover with our panel if we have the time. And the first question I would like to put is that we've seen recent headlines announcing more penalties for European institutions for AML non-compliance. Many of these are the largest banks in the market. My question is, if the Tier 1 banks with all their resources can't manage to avoid the massive fines for AML non-compliance, how can smaller institutions avoid the same pitfalls? And perhaps, Annegret, I could ask you to pick that one up.
Yeah, I think Mark actually will take the lead on this one.
Oh, my apologies.
No worries.
Thanks, Hugh. No, happy to. And look, firstly, thanks for this opportunity to join you on the panel discussion today. So look, yeah, I guess in terms of this first question around, I guess, some of the recent fines and what are the lessons learned that can be, I guess, drawn upon for the smaller institutions. I guess, firstly, a couple of points just on the general kind of trends from the regulatory landscape. I think it's kind of clear that financial crime remains very high on the agenda, and that the regulatory scrutiny continues to increase. But it's not just increasing. We're actually seeing that the way in which firms are supervising institutions is actually evolving as well. I think Annegret has a slide here with some of the fines, but I'm sure many that have joined this kind of event today will be aware of some of the big fines that have been issued by the FCA over the past year. And it's actually really interesting if you take a look at some of the decision notes. They're a really good and important source of kind of regulatory expectations, and kind of really show kind of the depth of review and kind of challenge that the FCA, for example, is going to at the moment. And I guess arguably regulators have historically focused on the larger firms, but clearly this is changing. And a good example of that is the wave of Dear CEO letters that, again, I'm sure many of you on the call will have been aware of, such as the letters to retail firms, letters on trade finance and global equity finance, all good examples of how in the UK at least, the FCA is kind of broadening its kind of scope of supervision. If you look at across though some of these recent enforcement actions and the letters, there are a number of kind of recurring themes across them, and to be honest, many of them kind of point to some of the fundamentals and the core aspects of the kind of the control framework, if you will. So, pointing to things like challenges around governance and oversight, weak kind of risk assessments, and challenges in the kind of core areas such as client due diligence and transaction monitoring. I guess it's important to note as well that you know, these kind of fines that often are kind of focused on the large institutions, you know, these kind of large tier 1 global institutions do face particular kind of challenges, right? They're often kind of faced with legacy kind of data and technology challenges. Sorry, they tend to offer a breadth of services and have quite a broad customer base, and often have to drive global large programs of work that kind of manage multiple regulators and kind of stakeholders. I think that's just kind of important to call out when we try and draw a comparison to a large kind of global institution and perhaps a kind of more national or kind of smaller niche focus firm. But I guess to actually respond to the question around how can smaller institutions avoid the pitfalls and what lessons can be learned from some of the larger firms. Again, I guess to come back to some of the issues that have been encountered and some of the common themes, really it's about kind of, or at least from my perspective, it's about kind of making sure that the basics and foundations are right as a kind of a first step. And you know, if you kind of look really into some of the challenges, many of them stem back from trying to apply the risk-based approach. And this kind of really comes to or becomes more concrete when you kind of look at a firm's risk assessment, right? Which is all about kind of understanding the types of risks that a institution faces based on the jurisdictions in which they operate, the types of customers that they serve, the types of products and services that they provide. And if the risk assessment is kind of got right and is robust, it provides a really good platform and kind of basis for any kind of remediation or transformation change type activities that an organization might decide to kind of embark on. I think the other kind of key kind of area as well is around the overall kind of governance and in particular kind of management commitment and kind of risk appetite. It's becoming increasingly clear that that is an area of focus for regulators, but it really does drive kind of the culture and kind of ambition within organizations for how they go about tackling financial crime. Final point, and then I think I'll kind of hand over to Annegret, is that leveraging technology is also a really important part of how any institution responds really to kind of financial crime. Clearly, meeting regulatory obligations and managing risks effectively can represent a significant amount of effort, whether we're talking about KYC or transaction monitoring or kind of name screening. You know, leveraging technology is effectively, it's a must in order to be able to scale to the volumes of customers, the volumes of activity that kind of need to be monitored and managed. And without technology, it becomes incredibly hard to do that in a cost-effective way. But that's my initial thoughts, Annegret. Maybe if I hand over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark, and also thank you, Hugh, and the FS Club for inviting us today. I think a lot of the things that you've mentioned already, Mark, really resonate with what we see and what we as a technology company are approached with by our customers and the industry experts that we speak to. So the recent enforcement actions, I think, have mentioned and scrutinized, for example, automated transaction monitoring systems in a way that we haven't seen before. And they're, number one, putting in onus on the initial setup of those systems, so ensuring data is where it needs to be in order to enable effective transaction monitoring. But a big topic that I'm mentioning also is the maintenance and the ongoing updating and maintenance of those systems. And so in the conversations that I'm having, that is coming up more and more. It's not just a question around what is an implementation of a system looking like, what is the setup, but actually how can this effectively assist an organization in making their lives easier for the years to come, as we know systems tend to be in place for a longer period of time in our control frameworks. But really, how can we flexibly adapt as the controls are changing, as the risks are changing around us? I think A second topic that we're seeing is really COVID, and the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted some of the operational inefficiencies and some of the operational challenges, which have caused backlogs, which have caused kind of risks to go hidden in those backlogs, or I recently heard somebody call it an inventory of risk that you know might look at with varying degrees of worry. But it has been kind of a way of identifying gaps in our systems, in our controls, but also identifying areas where the operational burdens in BAU and inefficiencies are just drawing capacity and resource away. So that's another topic that we're seeing is really an ask of institutions to look at technologies that help them reduce their burden and help them deploy capacity and free up resources in a way that will allow them to focus on the higher value activities, and the highest value activities work on the cases that are relevant, review the risk assessments, and also align their organizations on those outcomes, and kind of using this outcome lens and then drive their organization to that outcome.
Thank you very much. I'll try and get it right this time. This one I think is for you, Annegret. So most banks have invested in AML systems. Is the only solution to these changing requirements for them to rip up and replace, or is there a better way to extract more value from the existing investments?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is what we're talking about, augmented analytics. And augmented analytics, what we mean by that is the deploying of technologies to derive additional data insights, to derive additional risk coverage, and to help derive greater value from the investments that are already made and from the control frameworks that are already in place. And so I think the first stock to identify the potential for augmented analytics is to take stock where you are on a maturity journey, or where you are with your financial crime strategy and how you position yourself. We sometimes have conversations about deep learning techniques, but if an organization is just starting out by exploring analytics, advanced analytics, there's other steps that you can take to probably derive better value. So it's, again, having those value-based conversations, outcome-based conversations. And what we've done up here is kind of a view of a maturity arc and of areas of expansion that we see and sophistication that we see. So everybody will be aware of the rules-based traditional systems that are traditionally reactive, where we're working in specialized domains, performing monthly monitoring of data, for example, in our surveillance or transaction monitoring systems, and where we have this higher cost of maintenance as those systems tend to be reactive. We also see then organizations moving to a more proactive realm. So those could be teams that are intelligence-led, that are using leads, trends, open source intelligence, a wider view of trends and leads to identify the risk exposure of an institution, and then using that as an additional insight into your financial crime controls. They're performing horizon scanning. They might also make use of new data assets. And by that, I mean, for example, data assets that are still underused in AML, so such things as device information, IP information. As we know, it's more and more of the financial services experience is moving online. We're all generating data at a massive rate. And some of those data points can also be really helpful for our AML efforts. Another kind of step then that we see organizations take is advanced analytics and further collaboration. So that can be multi-entity sharing within a group, within an organization. It can be industry forums, efforts such as the GIMLET or Joint Money Laundering Steering Group. It can be initiatives like Transaction Monitoring for Netherlands, where there's thoughts about an AML utility. We also see organizations actually look inside to pool data assets that already exist. So that might be data used by the cybercrime domain, that might be data used by fraud teams, and actually make better use of the data that already exists in an institution. We also then see the deployment of advanced analytics. By that we mean things like machine learning assisted, scenario discovery, prioritization, greater risk coverage, and so on. And then maybe one day in the future, and the conversation that we're starting to have with our customers in Eastern Europe is kind of moving towards a more predictive realm for AML programs. So regulators in that part of the world tend to expect a shorter time to risk identification as a business activity reporting, and in some cases even the real-time reporting of risk. And maybe, maybe in 2 years' time we'll have a conversation about prevention, money laundering prevention, prediction, and kind of moving into that arena.
Anna, great. Maybe if I pick up a couple of points there as well. I think largely just to reiterate a couple of the points there. I guess on the whole kind of rip and replace question, I think you're right. It really kind of does depend, right, on the drivers and kind of circumstances of the firm, right? It's a real kind of different levels of maturity that institutions are kind of set in. They face different risks and will have different business strategies. So it's really kind of thinking through, are the drivers here around effectiveness and trying to close gaps and kind of risk areas? Is it around addressing kind of efficiencies and kind of cost type challenges, or are there kind of more immediate things that need to be tackled, such as regulatory commitments? So it's really kind of spending a bit of time thinking through that and then mapping that to the current capabilities, right? Can actually some of these gaps or kind of objectives be achieved through the current infrastructure, or actually are there kind of fundamental kind of capability gaps, right, that simply can't be addressed through the current infrastructure that the organization has? Equally, sometimes it's worth kind of thinking through, are there some underlying root causes that are driving the challenges here? Sometimes it's not necessarily the control per se that's causing the challenges, but it might be back to things like data quality, for example, or lack of kind of people skills, or kind of the right kind of level of oversight. So some of those broader kind of operating model kind of aspects that kind of sit around some of the kind of the solutions that we put in place actually might be some of the underlying root causes here. But yeah, I think certainly kind of echo some of the kind of the tactical types of initiatives that we're seeing, such as segmentation, tuning of rules, thresholds, secondary analytics, alert triage, that sort of thing. And we are definitely seeing as well institutions kind of trialing alternative approaches such as machine learning and other capabilities alongside their kind of existing systems. But sorry, Hugh, I think you're about to move on to the next question.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, both. And perhaps, Mark, I can ask you to continue picking up the first response to the next question. When we look at the sort of deadlines for new regulations, they've shifted from perhaps an annual event maybe to certainly now a constant stream for financial institutions, as regulators themselves try to keep pace with organized crime and changes in the markets. This poses a challenge for organizations dealing with legacy technology and siloed systems of data. Is there a way for those institutions to get out ahead of the pace of change and be a bit more strategic rather than tactical in response to mandates?
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. And look, it's a great question, and it's one that we get a lot from our clients. I think probably the first thing is actually accepting that this is a journey, right? And it's an iterative process. So many organizations that we work with set up large-scale transformation projects where there's kind of an expectation that once it's done, it's finished, and you can kind of move past it, right? And we can kind of forget about it. But the reality is that as a I guess an industry, we're continuing to build our understanding of the threats, right? What really makes good, effective controls, and as such, the industry practice, the regulatory kind of expectations, and the way in which firms are supervised will continue to evolve. So I think that's kind of first thing, is we probably need to change our mindsets and expectations around this a little bit, that this needs to be a continuous iterative journey. It's not something that can just be solved through a bit of investment for a year or two. But I guess some kind of key areas. I think, again, I'll probably touch more on the broader operating model and let kind of Annegret speak more to, kind of what can be done and what's the art of the possible with the technology. But kind of investing in people we see as kind of a really important part of, I guess, being more proactive and getting on the front foot. So bringing in the right kind of skills and experience with knowledge of the domain, understanding of the risks and kind of industry practices is kind of a really important part of that response. And that kind of allows, organizations to incrementally build the awareness and understanding within the organization that will ultimately put them on a good footing in the kind of the longer term. Another kind of key, I guess, area to think about is alignment with business strategy, right? So sometimes the whole kind of compliance risk management function and the core business can be two separate kind of parts with a brick wall kind of between them. So again, bringing the, I guess, the front line and kind of the real kind of aspects of the business in line with the kind of the compliance function and getting them to work together effectively, again, will help to kind of put the organization on a good footing and be more responsive and aware of kind of the changes that are coming down the line. I think horizon scanning equally is quite important, right? So being engaged, joining events like this and conferences, being aware of kind of the direction of travel and kind of regulators, and again, coming back to that kind of risk assessment is a really quite important part of kind of building that kind of plan and strategy for the organization in terms of how it's responding to the evolving kind of threats. But I guess to come to kind of infrastructure and technology, this is kind of often where it kind of really hits the ground, right? And there are often kind of challenges around being tied into, I guess, legacy systems, challenges with poor kind of data quality. And so here, it's kind of really around, at least in my view, kind of building those in-house kind of analytics, data science capabilities, kind of investing in data, and thinking through kind of technology choices in a way that you're kind of selecting platforms that will be flexible, customizable, and agile to kind of what is inevitable kind of changes from kind of regulators and kind of threats that the organization might face. But Anna, great, maybe I'm sure you have some thoughts, particularly on the technology side here.
Yeah, I think you've described really well actually the factors that can make any transformation system or transformation program successful. And we think actually augmented analytics can be a really good way of having a small outcome focused deployment of technology or increase in the internal capability, which can be used as a kind of first step in these incremental improvements. And absolutely, it is a change, often a culture change, and this is part of the reason that rip and replace is such a scary word for everyone, from the technologists to compliance to operations and our financial crime fighters. So, kind of aligning an organization on the outcome that we're trying to improve or the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and then also taking that organization on the journey and kind of getting this buy-in to look at maybe the increased risk coverage, maybe the additional rules or additional use of analytics, and really explaining kind of what those benefits are for each of those stakeholders. That really is key to success. And we have been in situations where there have been adverse incentives where maybe there's been an interest in deploying certain technologies or deploying certain analytics, but actually then the analysts who are working with these technologies day to day weren't enabled, haven't received the training, and haven't kind of hence received really a reason to look at those new technologies and those new outcomes, and that is really as a detriment to us all and to better financial crime detection. So that's why we think a small first step, which is kind of introducing this culture of incremental improvements, can be really useful. Also not trying to do too much too soon. So kind of back to the question of identifying in the risk assessment, what is the gap? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And it could be, and we have some examples on the top right hand side, it could be something like an alert risk scoring and prioritization that can help with ongoing kind of backlogs and point to most productive and worthwhile alerts. It can be the introduction of anomaly detection and outlier detection, which might currently not be available by kind of inflexible rule systems. It could be the introduction of behavior analytics and behavior profiling. We see peer groups are now being defined according to behavior attributes, peer groups, etc. but also maybe it is the capability to run some ad hoc analytics and modeling and maybe dip the toes into internal data science capability. And so whatever that first step might be, that is one that augmented analytics can support with. And then we really see our customers looking for a solution that doesn't replicate what their existing transaction monitoring system does, but absolutely adds the value and also is a platform for further change and improvements. So I think that's what we're describing here with hybrid model. We're not trying to replicate the problems of the past and not trying to replicate the also technical depth of the past, but looking to bring value with a lightweight technology that provides clear benefits, KPIs, and where also the benefits are felt, I guess, all the way through for everyone that is working with those.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. As much as financial institutions want to look to the future, the pressure of compliance is very present in an urgent way and felt very keenly. So with institutions with those critical needs to ensure compliance, how should they proceed, Annegret?
Yeah, I think actually my last sentences were already relating to this question. It is really
Definitely
identifying the outcomes that you want to achieve, really getting the buy-in across the organization on what those outcomes are. Here's some examples, I think, of types of analytics that could be deployed, or as you said, the art of the possible for some augmentation, optimization of existing systems. And it's also looking at time to value. So sometimes also larger technology transformation projects are failing because they're trying too much too soon, or that they're just taking a long time because we tend to underestimate the technical integration efforts, how long it will take to plug into existing systems, getting data from different data owners internally, etc. So we really, and we ask you that you ask us as technology partners to insist on time to value and the realization of benefits quickly within a reasonable time frame, as only then can you keep this momentum within an organization that alignment can see fruits. That might also mean that you might be looking for solutions that could be hybrid or could be deployed in the cloud. Again, different organizations are on different journeys in terms of their adoption of cloud technologies, which are incredibly well suited to adapting to change, to increasing in scale, and to further iteration in the future. But again, depending on where you are on that maturity journey, exploring cloud for an augmented analytics technology can be really interesting. Again, because it is a small, contained, outcome-focused deployment of technology, so it will be well suited to kind of a first experience with the cloud, as much as it could be well suited to the first experience with certain advanced analytics or capabilities that haven't been present in an organization before. I think the last piece as well is to look at solutions that don't require large amounts of additional data and additional investment. So solutions that can work with the data that you already have in-house, or can help you make use of those data assets that are existing within an organization, so that you derive more value from your internal data. As we see organizations, and I think there's an executive out on the conference circuits who keeps saying banks of the future are really data houses and are really kind of data safeguards for their customers. So we're kind of having a bias towards solutions also that do not require a large amount of external data or kind of buying of additional data assets, that it can help with time to value and time of getting those solutions live.
Great. Maybe I just come in and I think again I'll just reiterate a couple of points that you made. I guess I think in terms of the response that we see, for many, it's a combination of tactical and strategic kind of measures, right? Often there's kind of a need to show some form of response and kind of uplift as early as possible, particularly if there are kind of gaps. But equally, in terms of kind of establishing control, it's important to have that kind of strategy and I guess broader kind of roadmap and plan in place. So yeah, I guess again, all of this depends on the specific kind of circumstances and kind of challenges that an organization might be facing. But more often than not, it's important to make sure that the foundations are in place. So again, I think at the outset, we kind of talked about some of the FCA kind of DSCO letters, which talked about challenges in governance, challenges in kind of risk assessment, policies and procedures. That really is a common kind of recurring theme that drives so much of the downstream activity in terms of design of things like the transaction monitoring solution or kind of screening type controls. I think you talked earlier about some of the different tactical accelerators. We see many of those being kind of adopted, whether it's kind of the secondary analytics, whether it's applying things like RPA, kind of robotic kind of process automation to investigation of alerts. There are many different kind of accelerators to help kind of move things forward in the near term. But that kind of strategic side of things, again, as you kind of rightly said, it's all about tying that back to the obligations, the gaps, the risk assessment, and the business strategy. And again, just to reiterate, it's important to kind of recognise that that is an evolving thing as well, that it will no doubt need to change and iterate over time.
Thank you very much. And moving to our final question. The industry is keenly aware of the potential benefits of machine learning for anti-money laundering processing, but for many financial institutions, the data science resources may well not be in place right now. I mean, is there a way forward for them? Perhaps Mark, I could ask you to pick that up.
Yeah, thanks Hugh. Yeah, I'll have a first go. I think Anna Greg could have actually pointed this already, that again, it needs to be kind of viewed as a bit of a journey, and it's important to kind of build incrementally. Some organizations really are not comfortable and do not work with data within their kind of compliance functions on a regular basis. So for some, it's really about kind of increasing the familiarity and level of reliance that they will place on analytics within their compliance function. So that could be as simple as building up the number of management information, right? Quantitative kind of metrics for how the organization as a whole is kind of performing, how well it's kind of meeting its obligations, mitigating its risks, how efficient it is, right? How it's kind of managing its costs. Equally, that could be getting into some of the aspects around building segmentation models or customization of rules. So I think Anna was right earlier in terms of choosing small kind of manageable aspects that will drive value and show progress and support that overall build of capability and the journey to a kind of target state. So that's kind of the point around building incrementally and getting more and more comfortable with the use of kind of data and data-driven decision-making within an organization. I think that, again, there are probably a few other kind of points that we've mentioned already. I think one important one is around actually investing in the data itself and recording the outcomes. So, use of machine learning will obviously be sensitive to the data that an organization has. So the more that can be done to kind of enhance that data, ensure it's of a good quality, that it's covering the areas that are needed to input into, say, a transaction monitoring solution, the better. Again, that will help prepare when these types of solutions are kind of introduced. But equally, I think particularly for things like machine learning, where it's helpful to kind of have labeled data, for example, spending time making sure that the investigations function, for example, are recording the insights and the outputs of their work, such that is available to the project kind of teams and the data science teams. That again helps to put some of these capabilities on the right kind of footing. I think one final point for me probably is around collaboration. So, this is an area where there's a lot of discussion, particularly around the regulators' kind of appetite for adoption of machine learning. And there's been, I think, a lot of effort, certainly by the FCA, and there are others, where they've kind of hosted things like tech sprints to kind of encourage the experimentation around kind of technology and innovation, in particular kind of machine learning. The more that we can do that and kind of learn from each other and kind of build best practice, I think the better. And that's, I think, particularly relevant for smaller institutions that might not have kind of the resources to be able to bring in big data science teams. The more that we can work together and across kind of industry around kind of standards and best practices for the adoption of machine learning, I think will help the industry as a whole. But Anna, great, I'm sure you've got lots of insights and thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with that. Absolutely, just on that maturity arc, even when it comes to the adoption of machine learning, we're also on an arc together. And I think maybe what many don't realize is that there's also ways of incrementally increasing kind of the usage of machine learning, and there's other ways to kind of harvest some of that computational prowess and that insights that machine learning can generate, even if you don't have a beautifully labeled training data set available, which of course is fundamental to data science activities, but there's other ways of leveraging machine learning in your organizations. I think one example that we have here on the screen is really a hybrid approach. And so what we foresee also the future of the financial crime controls to look like for detection systems is that we will continue to have our rules in place. Rules are driven by human expertise. The regulatory bodies are outputting their activity indicators, red flags, etc. So we will continue to watch out for those kind of deterministic indicators. But as we're moving forward, there's ways to enhance those rule sets, either by kind of replacing the static thresholds that are sitting within those rules, so we can use behavioral or dynamic thresholds and parameters that are looking at averages, kind of peer group behavior, rather than the static 10,000 pounds, US dollars, euro value, etc., that we still sometimes see. But there's also ways actually to use machine learning to identify rules and scenarios within a system. So machine learning can also perform the data analysis and then help us identify and derive rules that are very well and explainable, but rules that would also lead to good outcomes and that can help us extrapolate some of the past trends that we've seen to a wider population. Another thing that we have here on the screen is kind of an example of the deployment of machine learning and the increased use of models. So in a first step, what a model can do is, for example, in a hybrid setup, prioritize rules outcomes. So that is often a quite simple uplift in day-to-day efficiencies, is being able to score alerts that are generated by the rules and allowing organizations to focus their resources on those that will be most productive and most worthwhile, again, helping with the risk-based approach and also with the backlog issues that we see sometimes. Also, the model can extend the application of those scenarios and kind of known patterns to the populations that have never alerted before. So one of the challenges with labels is that and labels and feedback and reviews is that there's a certain population that we've never looked at because they've never been brought up by our detection systems in the past. So the machine learning can help with that. And also then, as we're moving maybe into year 2, year 3 of the deployment of such systems, the models are retrained and tuned and start to explore more patterns in the data and identify new and novel threats and really take a larger or have a larger impact on the identification of emerging trends and risks. And we think that that can actually work really well together in an exploration strategy where you define some rules, test some rules, but also then let the machine learning do the heavy lifting of crunching through all of your data and identifying whether that is a useful strategy or maybe less so.
Brilliant. Thank you both for some really fabulous insights there. What a fascinating conversation. I'm pleased to say we've got some audience participation as well, and I have a number of questions which we've got a few minutes, so let's run through some of them. So the first question is from Olivia Bosch, and she says, thank you very much for your presentation. In the way that GDPR heightened attention for the need to link up more with information stroke cybersecurity, would the increase in fraud, non-compliance, etc., also heighten the need for such increased interrelationship with cybersecurity, or are there other dynamics that should be brought to bear?
Yeah, I think GDPR. Let me take a first stab, and then Mark, please add on. I think GDPR is a really interesting topic. Also, UK GDPR. It's a conversation that we have with also our US colleagues. I think absolutely we see a convergence and kind of the fusion of data assets in the area of cyber crime, fraud, as well as AML. So. But the beauty is also that a lot of the advanced analytics and technologies that I think the industry is moving towards, they can actually work with less PII data. So there's ways of combining security enhancing technologies with advanced analytics so that actually organizations can remain GDPR compliant, data can be tokenized, also so that really speaking again about financial institutions as the safeguards of their customers' data, that data remains within the parameters of that organization, but kind of tokens or anonymized kind of versions of their data are for a limited use in other systems or sent to other systems for the processing and financial crime detection. So I think the advance in privacy enhancing technologies, etc., works really well. And again, there's so much still to harvest in the data, transactional data, using it across different domains, that I think the effects of any sort of GDPR limitations can really be limited.
Yeah, I guess, and just to add, I mean, I hadn't quite picked up on both dimensions of that kind of question, but yeah, I mean, clearly there's I guess, something to think about in terms of, growing kind of threat of fraud, particularly cyber-enabled fraud, and what that means in terms of controls that an organization needs to be in place, but equally the institution's kind of role in terms of how it protects its customers' data, right, and kind of mitigates any kind of potential kind of risks of kind of cyber threats that might lead to then fraud and kind of financial crime. I guess specifically on the first point, I think we are seeing kind of institutions obviously having to respond very quickly to the growing threat of fraud, and to some extent, I think fraud has probably become even more of a priority now than money laundering in some extent, given the level of threat. And there are clearly some synergies. So we're definitely kind of seeing risks and typologies in the money laundering systems that are starting to span across what you would typically find within fraud detection type solutions. So I think we're starting to see more and more that kind of discussion around the alignment and I guess convergence of fraud and AML coming back to the fore. It's very relevant and kind of timely in the current times. I have to say I'm kind of not an expert on the GDPR side of things, but it is a regular, I guess, concern that we kind of hear is around controls being kind of data hungry, and are we actually increasing the risk? I think that is a concern, but probably not something I can comment on too much.
Thank you very much. I think we've time for one more question. From Richard Parley, he asks, some banks have over 5,000 staff just looking at false positives generated through using poor algorithms, and that's way more staff than Europol or the City of London Police. How do your techniques and the things you've been discussing reduce this rather ineffective activity?
Anna-Gret, do you want to go first, or should I pick that up?
Sure. Yeah, I think that is really an evolution again that we've seen, is that organizations have looked to resolve financial crime, have looked to kind of help with their programs by increasing the number of staff, which just can't scale in line with the changes to the regulation. It just can't scale with also the fact that our systems are still to a degree inefficient. So what we're recommending is a shift towards a different approach of detecting financial crime, right? So kind of going back to the question of what are the root causes of those high number of false positives. Is it the data assets that are not leveraged? Is it data that is missing? Is it rules that are set up? We know also rules that are incredibly inefficient. They aren't derived from data. They aren't a way not derived by statistical methodology, but they're derived by kind of human anecdotal observation. And we do tend to have biases towards certain type of rules and looking for certain characteristics, where actually the use of machine learning and more advanced analytics, you kind of feed the machine with very clear KPIs and very clear outcomes, and then let the algorithms do the heavy lifting. So be very happy to have a conversation kind of explaining how that has been proven time and time again. But again, I think it's a step towards there's incremental steps that you can take to reduce false positives and also help kind of reroute that resource inside an organization to those higher value activities that we spoke about before.
Thank you. Well, folks, it's been a brilliant 45 minutes. I've certainly found some really interesting material that Mark and Annegret have shared with us, and I've enjoyed their conversation. I would like to once more thank all our sponsors today, Featurespace, and to recommend to you the Financial Services Group events, and I hope that you'll find as much interest in them as you have today. And I thank everybody for attending and wish you a great rest of the day, and particularly thanks to Annegret, thanks to Mark, really superb session. Well done, and thank you to all.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.